Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth one insightful conversation at a time so that you can grow and protect your net worth and your net happiness. I'm Chris Snook, and today we're going to do this two insightful conversations at a time, starting with Claudia Quintela in the first hour and then bringing in Tavi Costa in the second. If you're joining in live on Substack, give us a share, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, whatever feels right. Do it all, do some of it, do none of it. But thank you for being here. And we're about to go into a deep dive with two of the rising stars in money and finance on Substack. Claudia Quintela, who we'll meet first, is coming up next. And then we're going to bring in Tavi, who actually I can't wait to surprise him because I think he's just waking up too. And he hit number 9 overnight in the rising stars of bestsellers. So let's get into number 1 today, guys. Let's see if we can jam a couple people over there. You're going to want to follow and subscribe to both of these folks. So do that throughout the show. Share this post right now, share this video, get it embedded. Let's get this thing over 1,000 people. Last week, we had as many as 844 at the peak with Charlie Garcia. If you haven't checked out that episode, you're going to want to do that too. But Claudia, welcome to the Atomic Level, and it's great to meet you. We cold called you too, and here we are.
Yes, well, Chris, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm so happy that you've asked. And I did tell you, I was so afraid of doing lives. You are actually my first live. Can you believe it? So yes, here I am.
Actually, but I'm honored, and I can. I think what's interesting about Substack, before we get into this, is it started out for writers, right? And so typically people write, sometimes they like to be on camera, maybe not. Sometimes they don't mind doing audio, but to do both is usually not maybe their default. Just like sometimes people who like to talk and be on camera aren't necessarily natively good at writing. Now we're going all at once with you. So you're brave, you're courageous. I think your career, as we get into that, also echoes that. But I'm really excited that you trusted a stranger enough to do this with us, because I think you've got a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm looking forward to unpack it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, as you know, you're a fan of the show recently because you saw the interview with Charlie last week, and I know you were doing some research on me. But just for those who are new to the platform, the show, Atomic Level takes folks through a narrative arc where we really go deep with the minds behind the message, and we also look to highlight and discover breaking new talent in Substack on finance and money. And so we look at, in your case, the woman, right, and what shaped her worldview. So I want to start kind of at the beginning, whatever that is for you, right, wherever you want to start, but really just so we get a sense of what shaped your worldview then and now. And then your operating system, the frameworks by which you go about your day. You work with emergent managers. You also have a thing called Midlife Mavericks, which we're excited to hear about. So you do 2 publications here, and you target a similar but different audience, and they overlap. So we want to understand those operating systems, what your frameworks are, and then the strategies that you're recommending or that you're deploying yourself. And then we'll get into the practical and tactical implications for everyone here so they can take it home and do something in their life with it. And then at the bottom of the hour, what we're going to do is bring Tavi in, and we're going to do it all again with him from his perspective. So let's start with you, the woman behind this whole thing that you're doing. Where did she come from, and what shaped her worldview, and kind of what was the impact? How did you get here?
Yeah, well, I like to start from the beginning because I think this has a very big influence in who I am today. I am Portuguese. I'm Northern Portuguese, and I am very Northern Portuguese. So I think that there's a lot of things that I see the world very much from the perspective of someone that was born in the 1970s in Portugal, right? That shapes, the things that you grew up with, the things that you had access to. And we were so fortunate to grow up in, none of us faced wars and all those things, right? So it was a great time to grow up. And my parents always incentivized me to go abroad and to see beyond the country, which I'm sure as a parent, and for those who have kids, know how difficult that is, because it's kind of incentivizing your children to go away from you, and naturally you would want them to be close to you. So I came into the UK 27 years ago.
Wow. So you've been there quite a while. You've been there.
I've been here. Yeah. I've been here more than half my life. And I was coming to do a master's at the London School of Economics. And then I was going to stay for a year. And here we are, 27 years later. And that whole history shaped my view of the world, because it was a very special time where we had in the UK a ton of European students that were able to come. So it was a very international, very bubbly environment. There was a massive things happening in London. I was fortunate enough to start my working in foreign exchange, which London is the global center for that. So again, one of those things that happened fantastically. I always wanted to study economics, but I've always had a very strong love for all the human skills and all those things. So I think I've been one of these people that has always been there in the middle, right? That is, I'm difficult to pigeonhole in a way. And I was fortunate enough throughout my career to be able to have roles that allowed me to explore all these different things that I do with people that perhaps didn't try to put me in a box. And I think that's really important, especially when I got to UBS, and credit to UBS. So, and to my managers there for that. And so from very early on, then I had the opportunity to travel the world, to go and meet hedge fund managers and hedge fund investors all over the world, mostly focusing on the strategies that I focus on, which are what I call trading strategies, so FX, macro, CTAs. And this is a type of manager that has a very different view of the world, because by nature they're entrepreneurial. And because I think because most people are always invested in equities, right? The equity markets tank and people don't get completely out of equities. But something happens with some of these strategies, with commodities, with futures or whatever, and people get out of those markets. So these managers have to very often justify their existence through the cycles, right? And so it's a particular spectrum of the market. And it's been very interesting to be, a Latin woman working in the middle of people that don't look like me, right? They're all men, they're all from completely different backgrounds, and how to communicate with people from all over the world. So all those things have shaped who I am. The fact that you are a person that grew up in a very different environment, and then is having to deal with these people from all over that communicate differently, that mean different things. And you are in a room translating what this person said and what that person understood. And that shapes everything from coaching to consulting to, those human skills, right? And so that has shaped me throughout my career. And I would say, I've always wanted the experience to work in a hedge fund, which I had the opportunity to work in one of the most brilliant firms in the world, which was Blenheim Capital, led by a gentleman called Wim Koijker, who was an absolute legend in commodities and a truly, truly outstanding human being. You normally don't get the two together. This was an outstanding human. Not just incredibly smart, but what a joy of a person to work for.
And was that so? I was gonna keep going on that thread, but I'm always curious. What are the headwinds and the tailwinds? Right? You entered the career. It sounds like right before we had the .com burst.
Just about. So I started just about, and you know what? That is a very interesting thing, because I saw there what happened. Because I entered the markets, people were doing what we call here, I don't know what they call in the US, the milk round, where all the banks come into the universities to interview and offer people jobs. And then, so that was 99, 2000. And so that was for my colleagues to start working near 2000. And some of them, by the time they finished their masters and the time they were going to start working, a lot of them had to go back, because those offers were conditional on work permits. And if you were a UE citizen or EU citizen, you didn't need that. But if you were from Eastern Europe or if you were from Asia, you went back because you were more difficult to get work permits. And so I already saw there, that was a massive lesson, because I studied finance and economics. And it's like, I was one of like two girls. They were all boys, right? And they were incredibly smart, incredibly hardworking people, like insanely, insanely talented, that went back because their country of origin was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then, and that made me think at that time. I already thought, okay, right? And
So
then,
so you were, yeah, I mean, was it what were the headwinds and also the tailwinds? It sounds like you got the chance to work with someone really special, which you kind of mentioned a little bit, but we can go deeper on some of those lessons learned and how it kind of inspired you to what you're working on today. But what were some of the headwinds that also drove you? Because everybody has kind of that thing where they get told no, or they hit adversity, or someone says, "Oh, little girl, go sit over here," whatever the thing is. I'm making it up, but like, was there any moments like that that stand out that also kind of either emboldened you or taught you a tough lesson that you then you put in and you kind of march forward? What were some of those in that early time?
how long do you got?
Well, we got all friggin' morning. I mean, no one's up on the West Coast. It's 4:30 over here.
Yeah. Look,
We got, on the
I
clock.
wasn't going to say this, but you've asked, and I've had 4 coffees. Haven't had 6 yet, so I've had 4 coffees, and you've asked, so you poked the bear. I'm going to go straight into it. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I want.
I am a woman working in a world of men.
Hmm.
And one of my greatest, there were always two things that were, people talk about, being respected, being all of that. But that aside, getting home in one piece,
Right.
being safe, right? And this is when I nowadays have, think about giving back, right? I now have conversations with loads of women who are in their 20s or early 30s and work in very male dominated industries. And they say, how do you deal with this? Like, how do you feel safe? Because this is a concern for a lot of women. And so I will tell you that some of those things shaped me, and that the way things were 27 years ago is not the way things were now. And so, if you're traveling around the world and you're a woman in the middle of 15 guys, you have to have your wits with you, right?
Yeah, and again, I think these things are important for a couple of reasons because a lot of the work you do right now is on the soft skills or on this midlife mavericks kind of thread, which we'll get into. And a lot of the things that we do in our 20s are focused on what's right in front of us, right? We think about the
Yeah.
future. We think about it as if it's never gonna end, right? Like we're young, so we're not. I don't think we're stupid. We're just different, right? And
We're
so
naive. We're
part of it,
naive.
yeah, you're naive, and you also are very focused on whatever it is that you want to achieve. And if you're in markets, if you're in entrepreneurship, if you're in any of those things, you're typically achievement oriented. And so you kind of like let things happen around you, or you tolerate things because they don't seem like a big deal because they're not in your direct way.
Yeah.
And then you get to a point where you have either kids or older, or you've been doing it for a while, and now you have this professional background, you have this kind of pattern recognition, you have this thing that you only get with time, but you also have this thing called regret or PTSD or whatever the thing is, and you have to deal with it, right? And so because you're doing the work today where you're working with people in transition or whatever, or that maybe are going out on their own for the first time, some of these things that got them where they are not going to get them where they're going. And
Absolutely.
I just
Absolutely.
want to touch on that again. At whatever level you want to go is fine, because it's you don't have to answer anything I ask, but I do think it's important because when we talk about wealth matters, we talk about 6 areas of wealth. Money's one of them, and a lot of this stuff is what am I doing it all for? And if it's not for something meaningful to you, and if it's not for something that makes you feel more whole, then that's the first place to look at, right?
Chris, you've hit the nail on the head. You've hit the nail on the head because in your 20s, you're thinking money, right?
Mm.
You are thinking money, and then you're thinking power, and power is influence, promotions, whatever those are the two things, right? You want to go up in your career, and then at some point in your life that changes. And the some point will vary for everyone. You were talking to Charlie Garcia last week, and he was saying, well, he turned 50. He sat his kids down and he asked them, what should I be doing now, right? So whatever element it is, it could be a birthday, it could be a turning point. For me, one of the turning points was, my dad had a stroke, and he was in a very bad state, and then he died 7 years late, nearly 7 years later. That really shaped the way I see things, because I went from career to my dad. This is what's important right now. And that when you have a disease in the family, when you have those things, God forbid, I don't wish that upon anyone, but that really changes the way you see your priorities. So the events in our life shape us. Yeah. So it could be a birthday, you turn 40 and you start seeing things, or, you have kids or whatever. But to me, it already kind of started there. And it started making me a lot more aware that, what is wealth? And touching on the 6 points of wealth. I am very fortunate that I started investing when I was 23. Okay. And I am not going to try to sell you a story that I was very smart, because I was not. There's one thing that happened at work that shaped that, which was I started working in a year where people in the UK realized that the defined benefit pension schemes were no longer viable. And therefore, people who joined the company at that point were all going to be onboarded into defined contribution pension schemes, which meant that the risk is on you as the employee, and you need to decide where you're going to invest in. And that made me go and read the documents, read the manual, and decide, okay, well, it's my responsibility. I should be aware of this. And so I started investing. And I started doing what we call ABCs, annual voluntary contributions that are matched by your employer, right? And I did that. And obviously now, 20-something years later, I don't have to work. And I'm very, very, very grateful for that. Every day I'm grateful for that, because it was a decision that shaped the rest, right? And then so the first thing is that people need, there is a basis of financial well-being that people have to have, right? And then when there is that basic, which varies from person to person, when you talk about families and wealth and so on, there's wealth. Then when the basics are satisfied, wealth starts taking other shapes. So what is wealth for you? And for me, it's not a car. It's not, it is spending time with my loved ones, spending time with seeing my kids every day for breakfast and for dinner. Is, one of my best friends, a person whom I love and adore, is my age and going through cancer. And I called her the other day just to go and see her, and asked, what works for you? When can I go and see you? What is best for you? And she said, okay, this Tuesday morning. Okay. I blocked my calendar. I'm not going to work on Tuesday morning. I'm going to see her. That is wealth to me.
Yeah.
That is wealth. Being able to go on a trip alone with my mom whenever I want. That is wealth. Being able to hang out with my kids, with my friends, my spouse. That is wealth. Being able to choose my clients. Being able to choose who I work with, which hours I work. That is wealth. Because obviously I am healthy, right? And I have more than a basic, level of financial needs covered. So I see wealth as, fulfillment, as the ability to do work that I'm super engaged with. We talked about AI before, and the fact that I can dedicate the hours I want to learning AI and to implementing AI and helping my clients with AI, that is wealth. Because money is totally about.
It's interesting because, a separate conversation I was having about this with a woman, Lori Van Duzen, who will be a podcast episode that airs in the next couple of weeks. And she's gotten to a point, her firm, she's been managing her firm for a couple decades, and I think they got 6 billion or something under management, but basically day to day, she doesn't have to do anything. She's got it all dialed in, and she's very active now. And her number one thing right now, because she's chairwoman and she's kind of able to sit and look on the business, she's spending 90% of her week understanding what AI is going to do to the relationship between managers and clients, right? And that's that's like when you get to a certain level where your money's working for you, whatever that
Exactly.
is, and it gets to, like they say, the first million is the hardest, or T Boone Pickett's, one of my favorite quotes was, the first billion is the hardest. But whatever the number is, that first thing is harder, because once it hits that flywheel status, then it starts to basically work harder than you ever could.
Yeah.
And time is that one thing where what you have the time to put your energy into, whether it's kids, family, friends that are in situations where they need support, and maybe you wouldn't be able to do that if you were grinding away still, or something revolutionary that has commoditized intelligence the way we commoditized electricity 100 years ago. Now, if you can put all your energy thinking around that, it's an advantage. And then all of a sudden the compound effect goes even further, because everyone else was too busy in the thing to take the time to learn about the thing
Correct.
that was going to change it all. And so
Correct.
it's like you hit that tipping point where even if you tried, you couldn't slow down your accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but getting there and having the mental capacity to put the energy there and is true wealth. Again, how you invest your energy and time is the only wealth that matters, right?
Yeah. And then I wanted to pick on something that you had asked, which was, that transition of, and I think one of the things that, and I don't know exactly how you phrase it, but you were picking on the transition from working, maybe being employed, to working for yourself, be it like as a
Well,
consultant or
yeah,
managing a fund or,
I think the way I would frame it, I'll give it to you to run with, is nobody resists change, but all of us resist being changed. And so sometimes when we are tired of working for whoever, right, we choose to do it on our own. Doesn't mean we know how to, but we effectively endeavor that way. And so it feels right. Other times someone comes in and moves the cheese, as I think Ken Blanchard said, or whatever,
yeah,
right? And now we're like being changed, and it doesn't feel right. But the reality is it's the same thing. It's just who initiated it. And so you're working with people who maybe they're effectuating that change intentionally, but I would also imagine you're starting to work with people who are being forced into embracing that
yeah,
change
yeah.
because they're laid off, or their dynamics are changed, or whatever it may be.
And it's very correct what you're saying. And I can see that in both areas of what I do. So I can see that in professionals that are kind of getting out of jobs because those jobs are being unwound. But I'm also seeing that as portfolio managers who are leaving off of a firm or something, and then that's a crucial point, a transition point where they think, I think this is the time, this is the kick up my back that I needed to start and do the thing on my own, right?
Mm.
And there is a very specific skill that I think one needs to have to go on their own. And it is not a pretty skill, but it's skill to ask someone to part with their money on your behalf. Okay. Whether you're raising money for a hedge fund or you're getting a consulting offer, whatever it is, you need to be able to sell yourself. And you need to be able to, I think selling yourself, we could talk about sales skills as the ability to convince someone to do something, right? So, I convinced my kids to have broccoli for dinner. I sold broccoli. Yeah, but I think when we're taking this a step forward is really the ability to ask someone to pay you money for you to do something for them. And not everyone feels comfortable with that. And so often I will see people who have very specific technical skills, who are not in sales jobs or in relationship management jobs or whatever, may struggle with that because they feel like, oh my gosh, this is like going to the dentist. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to ask someone to pay me to give me money for me to start managing their portfolio. It's uncomfortable to ask someone to pay me to go and do a project. Yeah. So they feel very comfortable talking about what they do. They don't feel comfortable about asking at the end.
And
And
you find
that
this
is crucial.
you find this is true even in money managers today?
Oh my goodness, you have no idea.
Really?
You have no idea. like 300%.
So, meaning, and I want to clarify this because maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, but someone who works at, call it UBS, doesn't matter the bank, right? UBS
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and they have AUM and they, um, I could see it if they're on the quant side, like where they're actually the one who's modeling out the portfolio and doing the work of where the money's allocated. I could see that, I think, there. But if they're kind of the relationship person already at a bank, I don't know why they would have trouble.
So that is so you raise a couple of points. So let's make a difference here, okay? If you're a relationship manager in the bank, if you're a salesperson in a bank, wherever, could be selling software, it could be,
Right,
you were in that position where you had to ask. Your job was to ask and to close.
right,
Yeah. First step, ask. Second step, close. Right. Now, if you're, say, for instance, a discretionary portfolio manager, because we all like to label the quants, the poor quants get put in that little box. I could tell you there's discretionary guys that should also be put in a little box. But, if there's discretionary guys, some of them think, well, why do I need to spend this time explaining this to you? I've already explained this to you several times and you don't seem to understand it. I'm fed up now.
that I can see that. And again, to parlay this into other industries, it's a similar thing. So that I do agree with, because developers, um, people that are very smart and that actually create the thing, or whatever the product is that we all should be buying. It's not even, sometimes it's ego, but a lot of times it's also just like,
They
you're
don't
negative.
choose the angle.
Yeah, I
They're
can't.
not speaking the same language. So they can't bridge that. Yes, what you're saying is valid, but the person that you're talking to, before you reach the decision maker where you can actually talk all the technicalities, you need to go through this person. They
Right,
need to be able to defend internally what you're trying to do and make a case for what you're trying to do, whatever that is. And this, we could be talking about plumbing, and we could be talking about hedge
right.
fund managers. We could be talking about consulting offers. It does not matter.
Well, even
Okay.
AI, and it happens in AI right now. I mean, I laugh because it's like everybody's going, "Why does everybody hate AI?" Well, they hate AI because we have the two worst spokespeople ever in the U.S. right now, with Sam Altman and Dario Amodei leading it, because it's all doom and gloom and it's all a race to some singularity, and and it's all job loss. Like, no one's actually painting the picture of.
His wife is actually quite good at explaining it. Dario's
Yeah,
wife.
but even now, and I get it, because the media is hooked on it and they love to lead with, what bleeds. But every headline you see on the mainstream media with him leads with something around job loss, or Mythos is gonna, break out, and we're all gonna die because it's found cybersecurity. Like, everything is negative.
Yeah,
And I understand why it's happening, but my point is to bring it home to what you're saying. It's just back to the basics of, why should I care if I'm not the 1% of 1% that actually needs to know how it works? I don't know how electricity works, but I sure as hell glad it exists. Like, I come into this room, turn on a light, and I can see you. That's a good thing. But if you
yeah,
made me understand how Tesla and Edison figured out DC and AC currents before I could turn my freaking switch on, I'm not doing it.
correct. And so, but I think that this comes back to, and this is very interesting because you're talking about AI, and I firmly believe that human skills are going to be more and more crucial. So we come from decades of people saying we should invest in STEM and in sciences and so on. And I firmly believe that. And I've always regretted that I didn't like physics and chemistry, because I always thought you are so much better serviced if you do, if your training is engineering instead of economics. Sadly, I never really liked it. So,
Yeah.
and now it's changing. And interestingly, yesterday, Reid Hoffman, his newsletter, Long Reads on LinkedIn, he was talking exactly about this. And I think there was another read that he was talking about, which is the chap from Netflix, right?
Mhm.
And they were talking about these skills are going to be more and more important. The ability to talk to someone and make sure that whatever you meant is what the other person understood.
Right.
That's put very plainly. This is just what we're talking about. If I want to convince you that the sky is blue, a good outcome of that meeting is you walked away thinking the sky is blue and not thinking the sky is red.
Right.
And you can apply this wherever you want. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
No. By the way, I like how you said chap. That's a very English thing to do.
It's a
That's
very English. The guy.
no, it just sounds better. You know, yeah, I think you're right, and I'm in the camp that being human's about to become really cool again, and that we've actually, without recognizing it, we've dehumanized um humanity for the last 20 years without maybe intending to, but
Mm-hmm.
we've done that because we've basically robbed ourselves of the ability to think. We've weaponized the advertising industrial complex through algorithms and social media. So we've connected more people than ever, which is a wonderful thing. You and I are talking, and when Tavi joins, we'll be literally on 3 continents having a conversation with people on 90 countries. And that is only possible because of technology and because of innovation. So it brings a chance to connect humanity in new ways on an emotional level and on an intellectual level that we would never been able to do 5, 10, even 15 years ago with
Correct.
the level of lack of cost. No one's paying for this. Substack is subsidizing it. Like we are here because of that. And at the same time, we feel less connected than ever. Like we don't know our neighbors as well. We don't have all that. And that's the dehumanization that has happened as we've kind of gone through this massive uplift in technology. And AI is going to take that to another level, but it's also going to do something unique, I think, which is create this barbell society or of sorts where we're able
Correct.
to automate and do things over here, and we'll be tempted to go all in over here because we'll be able to do more than ever. And the more efficient we get, the more we do. But at the same time, we'll be craving something so different over here for the first time in a while that we are reconnecting on a much more emotional and human level. And machines can't give that to us. And
No.
well, I think there's a real chance that humanity actually reconnects with itself in a way that it never would without AI. And I think
I
financial
hope
managers are
so.
catalysts for that because money is the thing, whether we like it or not, that most people stress over, most people lose health over, most people lose relationships over. And we don't want to get a better stock tip 24/7 from a bot. Sometimes we want to talk with a human when mom or dad's going to hospice or kids going to college or somebody has cancer that we want to help, or right. That's when we need a human to understand and empathize with us and then help us get to our decision.
Yeah, correct. And I think so. There's so much to unpack in what you said. Um, I started kind of dealing with this a little bit before COVID, um, because I started working for myself, and I always needed quiet space, which meant that I could never go to co-working spaces and so on. And so I've always been very isolated at home and always made an effort to go 1 or 2 days a week into full days of meetings, where it's just like super contact with humans, where I'm like, yesterday I was in meetings, 10 hours of just talking to people live. And it's like, it's a buzz. It's incredible. I spend a ridiculous amount of time on Zoom as well, but it's incredible to sit across the table to someone, look them in the eye, and the energy is different. What you get from them is different. And also, different people will relate differently to different ways of communicating. So when we started this conversation, you were talking about, Substack being a place for writers that now then also does voice and then also does a video. And I talk to my clients often regarding this, that how do you like to consume content? How do you like to learn? And if you ask 3 people in the same company, they will tell you different answers, right? And then my question to them is, then how are you producing materials? Because on the other side, there will be someone who likes to always read, and they will be reading on a mobile or on an iPad or on a computer or on paper. So whatever way you communicate needs to read well on all of those. Or they will like to listen. So how do you sound when you're in a podcast? Or they like to look at a video. On Friday, I had a call with someone who's like, he only likes to see the videos. So different people will relate to different ways of communicating. They have different ways of absorbing that and assimilating that. And if you're trying to sell your services, you need to know this.
Well, and you need to also realize that now a lot of those humans may do all those things in different order. We all expect and I am following and subscribed to you, so I like your stuff. I don't want to have to choose when I consume it. I want to be able to consume it where I am in a context that fits where I am. So I don't like
Yeah.
when people are on their phone and they don't have headphones on and I'm listening to their TikTok or whatever in an airport. So that's when I would like to basically, if I don't have earbuds or whatever, read you on my device because it's easier. But then when I get into my car, I want to throw you on Bluetooth and listen because now I'm driving and I don't want to stop where I left off. And so the ability to have me, the user, the consumer of whatever the message is, be able to kind of choose my own adventure of how I and where I consume you,
Yes.
what format is key. Like you don't get to make that choice anymore for the other person. You want to be with platforms and distribute it in ways. And now we're moving into Markdown, which means now I might say, you know what, summarize everything Claudia wrote for the last 5 years, and give me 5 talking points that are related to micro and midlife and this and that I can talk to her about on her podcast in an unscripted way. And now my agent is going out, and the
Yeah.
agent doesn't have eyes and it doesn't have ears. And so the agent is going through a markdown version of what you read. And if that doesn't exist, it can't do what I asked it to do, the human. And so
Yeah.
again, now the human gets friction. So again, we have to be aware of these things because again, communication is what you're talking about. And we have the ability to make that understandable in a multitude of ways, but we have to now deal with it both human to human as well as human to agent.
Yeah, correct. And you have to, so you flagged this very well that, these search engines are going to go and find those materials to prep for, I also have those. I've also created a bunch of agents. So for instance, when I'm preparing for podcasts, I like to always listen. I really relate to voice, not video, but voice. To me, voice is really incredible, reading and voice. So I've listened to several of your podcasts. So I probably have 5 hours on you. Um,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
and but then you also use the tool. So I've loaded a bunch of things you've done into Notebook LM, and that extracts me your types of questions and the kinds of things that your audience wants to hear. And based then onto my second brain in Notion, based on everything I've ever written, all the conversations I've had with my LLMs, how can I extract what I've done to best serve your audience?
So let's talk about that. That's a good segue to your frameworks and your strategy for helping people understand themselves and be understood by the people they're trying to influence. Because I want to tie it back to the emerging
Yeah.
manager and Mavericks, right? Midlife Mavericks, your two kind of efforts there. You just laid out a bunch of stuff. Some people listening to this don't know what the hell Notebook LM is. They don't know what you mean. They might not even know what agent means. I'm not talking to down to anybody. It's moving fast, right? So some people don't know that. That's all new terms. You should look those up. But give us a framework because those are the tactical ways that you are doing what? What are you really trying to get to? What is the framework trying to get to that
Okay.
now tools are helping you get to faster?
Yeah. So I tell you what my principles are,
Yes.
and then we'll build on the frameworks. Claudia today is Claudia 2.0 versus Claudia a year ago. Like I doubled my productivity. I am not joking.
I believe you 100%.
Okay. It is incredible when you think that I continue to be able to take on hedge fund managers, raise capital for these hedge fund managers, now do coaching, take consulting projects, do AI consulting as well with hedge fund managers, and write 10,000 words a week, 3 long form pieces that go into 50 short pieces of content. Like that is crazy, right? And I'm actually writing them. I don't have a bot writing for me. I love writing. Writing gives me joy. Right? So my principles really are, I use AI to save me time. If I have to do something twice, maximum 3 times, it needs to be automated.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is
Sure discipline. You go, have I done this more than 3 times? Okay, I got to automate it.
gets automated. And then I am building a body of work, which ties really nicely with portfolio careers, I guess. But the way that I think about everything that I do, and if and I like to relate to think about this. If for those who love cooking, I love cooking,
I
batch
love
cooking.
eating. I love eating.
Yeah, I love cooking, but I would never cook a small amount of something. I will batch cook because it's the same amount of work, and then you slice and dice. So the same way that I think about it, I think about a big kind of body of work. And so where can I put all the things, everything that I do has to be in a place that is accessible and so that it could always be queried. So I keep all my things in Notion, right? That's my second brain. And so everything that I've ever written, all the thoughts that I have, all the loose thoughts, if I read something that I love on Substack, or if I read something in a book, or if it all goes to Notion. It all stays there, right? And then all of that gets organized. This is where I have little agents and bots organizing things by themes. Hedge funds and startup hedge funds. There's, if you think about the world of hedge funds and especially emerging hedge funds, it's incredibly, I don't want to say secretive, but opaque.
Mm-hmm.
There is
Yeah.
very little out there opaque. So all the gold that I have is my hundreds of conversations that all my meetings are recorded. It's bloody gold dust, the content that I have in there. So the fact that I record all my meetings and I don't use just the meeting notes, I use the full transcripts. That is where your intel is, because you do not really, for you, there's things that are second nature to you. You talk to someone about wealth, you don't even think you have a methodology. You just do a brain dump. And the fact that you have AI that is able to actually extract that and say, you didn't think about it, but it is actually a methodology. All these conversations that you have with hedge fund managers, all these conversations that you have with coaching, all these conversations that you have regarding AI consulting, all these conversations have inherent themes underlying, and there's a methodology. And your brain was not connecting the dots, but the fact that you're putting all the data in there, the AI can connect the dots. And
Yeah.
then you can start producing.
Right. Every discovery call that you do with a different client, different target, whatever it is that you're selling, if you took all those and dumped them in and had a human review them and say, find me the 3 pillars of this narrative arc that are consistent across all these, a human A would take forever if they knew what they were doing. B probably wouldn't come up with it. And minutes from now, you could dump all 30, 40, 100 of those into an LLM and it'll go, here's the way Chris or Claudia sells. And here's what
Exactly.
works. And oh, by the way, here's how many converted within a month and so that is your intelligence, but that we can't see spit back to us in a way where when we see it, it's kind of like a personality test. Don't you think? It's like take a personality test. I don't know if this is going to be right or not. Because you like this and you're into audio and you're going, holy crap, that's me. Like you know it when you see it, but if someone told you to explain it, you wouldn't be able to.
Exactly. And so, for instance, I give you an example. I was a couple of days ago asking Notion to summarize all my methodology from just random, organize my stuff into methodology just from my calls with emerging managers and investors into hedge fund investors into emerging managers, so people who seed and so on. And it came up with 40 to 50 pages of my methodology. And I'm like, oh my goodness, right? And this is super important because it's the same way that to me, it's I when I'm talking to people, imagine regarding portfolio careers, one of the first things we were talking about sales skills and so on. If you ask someone, have you ever had to ask someone else to part with their money to pay you for something? Most people wouldn't have thought about that. And they say they think they can start a business, but if you don't have the ability, or if you're not willing to learn that ability to ask someone to part with their money to pay you, you're not going to be able to launch a business.
Right.
It's very simple because you need to ask.
Yeah. And
Right?
it's the way you ask too. Like,
Yeah.
like if you say, so Claudia, do you think maybe, somehow maybe you would want to, I don't know, spend $100 with me? If you say it that way, then it ain't happening. Right. But if you go,
Yeah.
Well, do you want to get started on Monday or Tuesday, Claudia? Which one would work better for you? That's a whole different way
Yeah.
of asking, right? So how we
Correct.
ask. So,
Correct. And so you were talking, for instance, a few minutes ago, you were saying, oh, I'm surprised that people who work in finance don't do the ask. No, they don't do the ask because they go into meetings too focused about, I'm just going to talk about what I do.
yeah.
And someone is going to miraculously then understand that just with what I've explained, I fit into their portfolio and they're going to write me a check. It does not work like that.
I'm interested in your take on this as you've grown your Substack as well, because one of the things that I'm, working on right now too, because it's a different form of asking, is the writing, right? Which your stuff's good. I think my stuff's pretty good. Like everybody thinks their stuff's good or they wouldn't publish it, right? And and then at the end of the day, some people have cracked a code where they have hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of people that pay for that, and other people are still figuring that piece out. And so how we ask and where we put that ask inside of this long form gold that we're dumping on people that have said they want it because they've subscribed to you or me or whoever,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, have you learned any? And I'm actually asking because
Yeah.
I pick your brain and steal your best idea, right? So I'm selfish right now. What have you learned in that, and what are you still sorting out? Because I know I'm sorting out some things with that.
Yeah. So you're not going to like my answer, Chris.
Like
I'm
the truth is what I like.
yeah. So I am very much I decided a few months ago that, okay, I need to start Substack. And so I started. I didn't give it a lot of thought. I didn't think I would have, 3,000 subscribers by now. I didn't come prepared for that.
Hmm.
And in the meantime, I was telling you before, so I had a podcast that was on that I totally exploded. And so there was an avalanche of inquiries that came from that. And I haven't really had time to sort through what the follow up and how do I tackle a commercial arrangement for my Substack. So I came to Substack with a view that I come here to learn and because I love writing long form content. I am a natural long form content person. The short form does not come natural to me. Okay,
Right.
so I came with that perspective of I'm already writing long form. I'm going to put Midlife Mavericks there just for discovery, and we'll figure it out later. And then I had always toyed with the idea of I have some strong feelings about emerging hedge fund managers and investors in emerging hedge fund managers, and I've never had the courage to write about it. And to be honest, if that podcast hadn't exploded, I would have never started writing about it. But it did, and I had a lot of people asking, so I started just jotting my thoughts down. And my idea was just to get that information out there because I can't service everyone. I work with a very small number of clients. So my perspective is if people read that, they should be able to go in. Managers should be able to pick that and go into a meeting and do much better into a meeting. And
Right.
investors should be able to read that. And if the managers understand that, they'll be able to better serve the investors. So my perspective was, how can I serve, bearing in mind what I know and the fact that I'm not bound by working for a very large company. I don't need to toe the company line.
Right. And yeah, and you don't need to worry about the editor, telling you can't say this, you can't touch that, or you can't.
Exactly.
You're the editor. No, that makes sense. And I think that's what's magic about it is not overthinking it. And
Yeah.
then knowing just you from this conversation, I'm sure now your brain's been computing, okay, well, now that I have this kind of thing and this momentum, how do I not automate? But again, if you're going to do this and you're going to start to convert people and people are going to start to apply this and have better meetings, you can't scale you beyond a certain point, but you can scale this infinitely. And so
Yeah.
you're probably thinking about, or will be thinking about, how do
So,
I hold a proper suite of offerings around taking it to the next
yes.
level in a way that is scalable.
So for emerging hedge, so the emerging manager, my goal is to grow this. I mean, first of all, both newsletters have around between 40 and 50% open rates. So
Yeah.
It's high.
That's high.
Yeah, it's high. And so I also run Midlife Mavericks and Kids. So that's around 4,500 people there, whatever, like total subscribers. But for the emerging hedge, I'm going to keep writing, and I'm not going to think about this. I'm getting the amount of inquiries I'm getting is ridiculous, Chris. I post something on LinkedIn. Every time I post something on LinkedIn, I have people asking to meet me.
And are they asking because what you're posting says that, in other words, are they asking hoping that you're available, or are they asking because there's a call to action in that?
They are asking because they are hoping that I'm available.
So you're actually contradicting your other point, which is you don't have to ask. If you write something powerful enough, sometimes
I am
get inbound, right? So,
yeah. So in my writing, the only call to ask when I post on LinkedIn, I have, a link into the particular issue of Emerging Hedge, and people come every time that I post. I will have not just new followers, but I will have investors contacting me and saying, "Can you meet? We need to talk." And managers coming to me and saying, "Can we meet? We need to talk." Which is,
we want to
I'm
talk
not asking for that.
Is there a common thread that they want to meet? What are they hoping for?
Well, the investors want to source managers to give money to.
Okay.
The managers.
And they want to be in that marketplace?
Yeah.
So here's what's interesting. One of my favorite books, which was really hard to read, and because I learned a new word every 4 sentences, I think, was Critical Path by Buckminster Fuller back in 1981. I didn't read it in 1981 because I was 6, but I read it in 2001 or somewhere around there. And out of that was this thread of a bee's purpose is never directly where it's pointed, right? So it's always 90 degrees. And it was this thread of how much it works. And our actual purpose is 90 degrees away from where our line of sight is. So a bee goes and flowers or feeds itself with pollen. What it's really doing is it's allowing you and I to live. It doesn't know, right? And so Bucky did this whole thing about that. And so I remember it shaped my thinking in a meaningful way, which is whatever we're going after, like we can go after this, but our actual true purpose is probably 90 degrees in the opposite direction, out of sight or peripheral. And what I just heard you kind of say in your own way was you went out to serve a specific need and audience and kind of scratch an itch that matters to you. And there's nothing wrong with that. What you're uncovering is you're uncovering this need in the marketplace that's two-sided, that says, I don't know who to give my money to, and I sure hope you do, because I'd like to give it to somewhere I can trust. And oh, by the way, I'm looking for good clients that want to give me their money. And can you help me find them?
Yeah.
And now at this nexus of those two people. And so sometimes when we aren't asking for the thing we should be asking for, what happens is the need and our ability to fill that need, and then how hard or difficult it is to replace us, becomes our biggest unlock. So the law of compensation, or law of value, is always the need, the ability, and our replaceability, simply put. Yeah. And I'm interested because have you thought about putting that into a business? Or is that just something that you're still like so early on, you're validating whether that's even something you want to do?
Like my objective for now, if you ask me, is to stop working weekends. I've been working like a dog.
I love it.
But, Midlife Mavericks.
That's when you're going to get better quality opportunities Monday through Friday, because you're now limiting when you will do what you want to do.
Oh my gosh.
But money will go up. Yeah, now the money will go up and the opportunities will get better.
When it comes to Midlife Mavericks, which is more established, I didn't set out to do anything. I was just writing about leaving Big Corp as a woman in my 40s and starting a business on her own, and I'm kind of following all these different passions and having a portfolio career, which is basically the ability to not be dependent on one employer, to do several streams of work that are very squiggly and all interconnected. Yeah.
I want you to dive deeper into that, because that's a definition I haven't heard anybody else use. I think that's yours, right? Portfolio career. So basically, multiple streams of income is what it used to be called, but what you called is a portfolio career. So unpack that a little bit more for people, because that's practical.
I will. So I don't know if in the US you used to use this word or not, but in the UK, in finance, when people say, oh, you have a portfolio career, means You're 65, you're no longer working for a bank, and you have a portfolio of NED roles, so non-executive director roles, where 4 times a year you sit on the board and you're making money out of that advisory, right? That's the old kind of, and the demographics, let me just put it this way, the demographics is not this. It's
No,
slightly different demographics.
it's this with grayer hair and a fatter belly.
Yeah. So that is in the UK, but actually, the term portfolio career comes from, I think, an Irish chap called Charles Handy in the 1980s, and he was talking about a portfolio worker of life. And I don't like to call this the multiple income streams, because obviously this goes into people that are, talking about, sell a digital product 100 times a day and you make whatever, the Instagram kind of crowd. This
Right.
is not about it.
It's
This
not
is
side
different.
hustle. It's not hustle culture.
It's not a side hustle. No, but it's people who have found a different way of working that doesn't depend on one employer, but usually may have a combination of things like, fractional roles or consulting or freelancing or writing or public speaking. So they do different things that may seem completely unrelated to the outside world. There's usually a thread connecting them all.
Right.
But maybe it may not make logic to the outside world. So these people tend to be seen as people who might be distracted. They have so many interests. But they're usually polymaths that, love doing different things, that have, and so they will explore. Maybe they do public speaking or they volunteer in a bunch of charities, and because that gives them joy. Maybe they do fractional roles because that gives them a steady paycheck. And so an anchor of income, which is what a lot of people struggle with. Maybe they do consulting roles of things that they absolutely love. Oh, there's Tavi. Hello, Tavi.
Yeah. Hey,
How's it
Tavi.
going?
He's hopping in early, so you're gonna hang out with us, and then we're gonna set the room again at the in a couple minutes and bring you in. So meet Claudia, Claudia and Tavi.
Nice to meet you, Tavi.
All right, so finish that thread of thought, because I think you're touching on something a lot of people, even listening to this or on Substack, can relate to in their own career, whether they're in finance or not.
Yeah, and so I see, and I see this, and this is really interesting because you traditionally associate people that want to do these different things with women talk more about it. Okay, women talk a lot more about this, but my role in finance and in hedge funds means that most of my time I'm hanging out with guys. Okay. And so it's really interesting that they don't say this publicly. And I've written about this, I think, a while back. I don't remember the name of the text, but it's one of the most seen posts that I've done, where I'm just finishing a meeting and then people go, "Do you have a second? Sorry, can I pick your brain on something?" Or, they send me a WhatsApp. I heard you say this. Would you mind if I ask you? And the question usually goes like, how did you do that? Because I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do not want to play golf. I want to be able to, I love what I do. I want to do it with a different intensity and pick exactly the projects that I work with. I want to focus on doing work that is strategic with people that are, within a certain subsegment. And that is the way that men will voice it. But usually what people are after, the words that they're after, is that they're talking about flexibility, creative freedom, choice. Yeah. And so that is a portfolio career. You could argue, Chris, you do have a portfolio career.
Well, no, I mean, I've been accused of it.
So that's, now you have a name for it. Now you have a name for it.
I think at some point, and as we transition kind of from the micro into the macro, and we get in from soft skills into some of the hard skills and analysts and everything else, I'd love for you to hang out. I'm going to reset the room here as we see people jumping in for the bottom half of the hour. Tavi, keep doing that, guys. Reshare the link, restack it. Subscribe to Claudia, subscribe to Tavi, that support their channels. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to reset the room here in a second, but we just spent the last hour with Claudia Quintela, and if you haven't heard of her, Midlife Mavericks, and also the Emergent Manager. are her two publications. There's a third one you said, Midlife with Kids.
No. I write for a Portuguese publication for
Oh,
corporate women. So yeah.
on Substack, two publications, but you can find her in the show notes. You can find her through this link. Just click on that. Support her. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk with now someone who basically is a persona of a lot of your kind of client base, and by the way, Tavi, before we set the room up here, you hit number 9. I saw overnight, which is amazing. You've been climbing the charts steady, so very excited. Let's get them to number 1 while we're on this show. That'd make my day. I want to be able to say we broke another number 1. So let me reset the room. Give me 30 seconds, and I'm going to bring Tavi onto the stage. Full speed ahead. Here we go. Well, we're gonna have a technical issue on the replay there, so we're just gonna get right into it. Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time. Except for today, it's 2 conversations at a time, back to back, doubleheader live stream on Substack. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple or any of the other, thank you for tuning in to the replay. And we're here with Claudia Quintela, who we just finished up the first hour with. And now we're moving into the macro and all things with a man who needs no introduction to most of you because he's climbing the charts rapidly. He hit number 9 in finance on Substack overnight and is probably going to be higher than that by the time we air this. So Tavi Costa from Sao Paulo, Brazil, welcome to the Atomic Level, sir.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you published so much stuff this week that even my AI can't keep up. So, so I want to unpack the things that are most interesting to you. But for those who are new to the format of this show, we start with the human first. So the woman in the first hour, or in this case now the man. And what we mean by that is what shaped your worldview? How did you kind of get here? Who are we listening to and why? Right. I want to understand the bias. So what shaped it? So you'll give us a little bit of the backstory, just because a lot of folks, including myself, don't know you well enough and want to get to know you over the next hour here. So the man, and then what shaped his worldview is kind of the first part of this conversation, and then we'll boil into the things that make your operating system work, how you think, how you analyze the markets, the different commodities, the different things that you're looking at, and the cycle at large. So what is your framework for that? And then strategically, what are you focused on? What are you advising people to do? What is your recommends? And then the practical and tactical is kind of how we wind it up so that everybody here can take something away from it and make themselves wealthier, some way, shape, or form across the portfolio of human as well as financial means. So, Tavi, how'd you get where you are, buddy? What's your story?
Well, to keep it somewhat short, but also entertaining, I was born and raised in Brazil and basically lived my whole life in a very entrepreneurial environment with my dad owning a small business that back when I was about in my early teenager times went bankrupt. And that sort of shaped my whole life, I guess, because of I've always been chasing success in finance, but not from a sake of success itself, but really from a safety standpoint. And I was always interested in businesses overall. That sort of evolved over time. I got into sports that then basically gave me a bridge to move to the U.S. Back when I was in college to play tennis at a D1 Division I school in the U.S. and that sort of opened my whole career.
Where was that?
That was in Virginia, Liberty University.
Okay.
And that kind of sort of opened my whole world. Of course, living in the U.S. after college, sort of in college still was just sort of fell in love with macro without knowing it was macro. And I was just reading the newspapers. I would read, just easily, 4 newspapers a day and from different sources, and started to connect the dots of how journalists tend to have their own views and realize what newspapers had different political agendas and so forth, and initially began to really have a more independent thoughts because I was very open minded to reading different views on different topics. And I think that sort of evolved into what I wanted to do, which was worked at an investment firm and do more of the analytical work. And it was very difficult, obviously, when you're a foreigner in the U.S. and still trying to figure out your legal situation. It took me a while, and then I was able to get a work visa and started working in what I wanted to do, which was finance. And I got involved with emerging markets initially because of my background, obviously, and I guess the shop that I worked at was very focused on quant at that time, and they had a lot of quant models, particularly looking at companies. And my thought was, why can't we do that on a country level and rank and choose countries and regions in the world where we can invest? And that was my macro side of the brain speaking very loud, and that sort of evolved from there. I created a whole theme about China that I was very interested about, and at that time I thought China was going to have a Lehman Brothers moment, and with implosion of some of their banks and the real estate market. And I also had a very negative view on the currency at that time, and I didn't know which way things were going to go, but I had a very strong view on this, and eventually it played out. There was a lot of it was a very contrarian opinion at that time. That also evolved into my views on commodities after seeing China blow up and have a lot of issues economically. Then that immediately gave me another sort of contrarian idea, which was to start looking at commodities because the main buyer of the market have already been in big trouble economically speaking, and that was potentially the time to be entering a new market. And so I stumbled onto a chart of capital spending for producers, of which I created because I was curious, and not because I wanted to invest in commodities, but for other reasons. And after looking at that chart and producing that chart wasn't easy. I was going back decades looking at a bunch of commodity producers and trying to aggregate how much capital they spent, and so forth on an annual basis. And after putting it all together in the model that I created, I realized that every commodity cycle begins with the depression of capital spending across the producers. Well, that makes sense because capital spending has a leading it is a leading indicator for supply. Very rarely we see supply increase without investment, and so that gave me, all right, well, then I want to be in commodities for this next a decade or so. And you never know, then sort of developed this whole idea. I mean, you never know really the catalyst of a lot of these themes, but you knew there was a big foundation for the idea to play out. Then the question was, all right, well, which commodity should I be getting involved? Well, then metals and mining came to attention because it's an industry that does take a long time for to get new supply into the market, and so I end up getting more attracted to that market. And if you measure most of the cycles across the commodity producers in different parts of the market, you will realize that mining is the longest. And again, because it takes 10 to 15 years, or it's more like 15 years to go from exploration to a producing asset. And so, that's how long it takes to bring in new supply to the market and then adjust prices. And so the cycles inherently are very long. While energy can be a little short, it can be more like 5 to 7 years, and agricultural can be more like 3 years, and so forth. And so, you can get very different cycle lengths depending on each part of the commodities markets. And so that also brought me back into looking, or not back, but for the first time into the junior mining space. And just because that was the most asymmetric way to play the whole mining idea. And look, macro starts from the very top, right? You start looking at these ideas, and you wanted to be in gold, you wanted to be metals, copper, silver. By that time, there was no real justification to own copper because of electrification and all those things like that. All of that came on later, and it wasn't the case. And so, please stop me if I'm going too long. I'm just
No,
sharing.
I want to let you roll for a little bit because it's good context, and I've got some follow ups that'll take us into some interesting direction. But I want to keep you rolling on this first part of kind of the road to here because I think it's good context. So keep going.
Perfect. And so we started to get involved with junior miners. Junior miners, the more you understand
I'm
them,
not sure I know what a junior miner is. Talk to me
sure,
about what a junior miner
small
is.
companies in the mining space. Well, you
Okay,
have
that's what I thought
seniors.
it was, but I didn't want to assume that. I didn't know if it meant something else. So
Seniors are more established companies with more producing, consistently producing assets, and you have the juniors that are usually, you can break down the industry into three parts. The exploration part of the industry, which is the earliest, where companies acquire a property and have claims, mineral claims, and look for metals in terms of drilling and so forth to explore that ground. That is a very early stage business that is very speculative, but also very interesting if you know what you're doing technically. And number two, then and you get into the development stage. After finding a discovery, you need to develop that discovery, and that's more of an engineering process and financial analysis into figuring out what the de-risking of that process will look like, and how companies will eventually get into a cash flowing stage. And then you have the re-rating of a company that goes from development to producing and so forth. And then you get the third stage, which is where a lot of the big funds tend to play into, just because it's simpler, it's easier to understand. There's not a lot of technical analysis needed in terms of the geology when it comes to understanding. Well, it does, but not at the same level that you have in exploration and development. And so, I thought that the most asymmetric way was certainly the early stage companies. And so I got involved, or I shouldn't say involved. I got connected to Quintin Henny, one of the what I think was one of the smartest geologists in the planet when it comes to exploration, and we started to invest in a bunch of these, junior mining companies.
and
That
all
when
companies, I'm assuming all these companies are publicly traded somewhere, right? None of these are private.
Some of them are private and some of them are micro caps. Like we're talking about companies that trade at about 20 million market cap, 30 million market cap.
Okay, so we're like pink sheet stuff, even like I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I mean they're very, these are companies that have very prolific ground, but they don't have any asset, right? And they don't have any. I shouldn't say any asset. They don't have any actual business yet, right? They all they have is a claim over a mineral, a mineral area, and they're looking for. They have a thesis to drill in that area, and if they drill and find something, that's where you get a company from 20 million to a billion. And we've been involved with a few, and that's your venture capital approach into mining that a lot of people were dismissing at that time. Now people are a little more open minded to it, but it's still, I mean, it's
I
still
think
very.
I'm coming at it with potentially a negative bias, but it's not based on a lot of fact. It's just based on a handful of experiences. A lot of the stuff that I have seen in that space or that's ever been presented to me was what I would call the typical, Canadian pump and dump, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
and I say that as a negative to Canada or the markets up there. I say that as that's been where I have seen mining deals for all the obvious reasons become shilled to, someone interested, but who is not looking at mid or large cap stuff. And again, I think that's a PTSD component I have at that early stage because I don't know enough or don't have someone like you that can really help me understand quality from the rest. And I don't know if that's other people's experience or not, but I'm curious, how you sort through all that slop because
I think 99% of the companies in the junior space are all scams and usually promotional
okay,
companies.
so
And so,
I'm not alone. I'm not crazy.
no, 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 no. I mean, I think it's funny when I see, funny in the sense of, when people in the crypto space talk about scams and all these things as if like they're discovering a new era of the world. And it's like, guys, do your research. The junior mining space has been there for centuries, and it is as bad as it gets. And you've seen everything. I mean, remember, no, there was a moment when we've had many situations in history where, companies were promoted to, very, very large market caps and end up not having anything. And so, we've seen plenty examples of that. And that's, still, of course, the industry has evolved and now we're forcing companies to go public with some level of technical reports that can sort of back what their thesis is and how much they have in resources. But I'm sure there's going to be issues, and you do, the earlier you go in the industry, the more technical geological expertise you need. I'm not a geologist, but I am, I can structure a deal. I can see things from an optionality standpoint. I can certainly create a portfolio thinking from a risk reward standpoint. And I think that there is a valuable, very valuable skill set of doing that in this market where it's just completely ignored for a good reason. You just said the main reason why it is ignored. And a lot of times something that is massively ignored because everybody agrees is just there's a lot of scams. And that's not necessarily our a place where you should just not invest. If you are taking the right mindset long term and looking for the right places to invest, it presents an incredible opportunity. Why? Because companies put out results today in that part of the market, and the market itself doesn't know how to interpret those results. Which, if you are a long term investor, it gives you a tremendous edge to accumulate when people are selling, and take advantage of those situations and own a big chunk of a company that could potentially become a multi-billion-dollar company. And so I got involved with that for a while. I still am very involved with that. I don't like to usually share much in terms of names just because I do think it becomes speculative. Of course, these are small companies and um, I avoid talking too much about it. But I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the market in personally. And where I created a lot of my wealth as well. And in some companies that became some of the best discoveries of North America and other regions of the last few decades. And so I've been very blessed on that for sure. And but in 2021, something fundamental changed in my career where an opportunity came through us of one of what it is the fourth largest silver mine in the world was for sale, and silver was trading at about, I don't know, 14, $15 an ounce.
Right.
And I was, I didn't have the money to buy it. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. And but I had a lot of connections alongside partners. Of course, it wasn't just me at all. And we put it all together, and it huge prompts for my partner Quentin Haney, who did most of the work on that side of things and became the CEO of the company. And now, if you think about it, we control the supply of silver in a certain way. We're the fourth largest. It's 35 million ounces of silver a year that we're producing, and so
Wow.
equivalent. And so it's huge. But there is a caveat to all this. It was in Bolivia, so nobody wanted for a reason. There's always a reason. And we felt comfortable with it. It was a mine that was operating for a very long time, never been nationalized, although the government was definitely very scary at that moment when we made the acquisition. In fact, we bought it for one-time free cash flow. And so our risk really was for a year. Then we restructured the company. We did 80% leverage, to 80% debt in the balance sheet, and then 20% equity, acquired the thing. And now, we own, we're the founding shareholders of this fourth largest silver mine in the world. It's a private company. And what that changes, well, then I caught the bug of wanting to acquire other mines and got involved into a lot of acquisitions of things that I wanted to be part of, and in different ways. And that also, I would say, of course, shaped my analytical skill set to look into businesses, not only from a macro standpoint, but now looking back and looking deeply into micro, and really going deep into analyzing companies. And so in structuring deals, which is a whole new world. And so, I heard a billionaire talk about this, and I totally agree with his comment, which is, I think successful people tend to evolve in their careers in many different skill sets, and you just have to do that if you want to go to the very top. And so, it is always uncharted territory when you get into these new things, but it's fun. I love it, and it's a huge learning curve. So,
Yeah, and
that
it kind of makes me guess at the fact that part of Substack, I'm not sure when you started your Substack, but part of that exercise is you're doing all this thinking on your own, researching on your own, and um, to sharing it with whomever might be part of your deal structure, your partner model, whatever. But at the same time, the thinking being broadcast publicly can both be of service to others. They can learn by looking at what you're looking at that they don't have a reason to look at, but maybe they should. And at the same time, it's a feedback loop for you at the same time, because you're getting other people's contrarian opinions, whether you want them or not, in the comments or in that. I would imagine that's part of the benefit of putting some of this stuff out there on Substack, is you're getting other people to weigh in and give you things to think about that maybe you hadn't, or validate assumptions that you want to be certain of. Is that part of the benefit?
I think you're right. There's a lot of benefits out of sharing your views. Well, first of all, a lot of these things happen in accident, not really, on purpose, or really planning ahead of those things. But when I started to share my views, I probably wasn't ready to start sharing my views analytically when it comes to. I was in the very early stages of my career, and this started in X, not even Substack. This maybe some people remember, but I remember getting calls from Wall Street Journal and other places wanting to get a quote from me, and I just wasn't ready to have enough things to say to get even a quote. And so I think I sort of grew my career, or developed my career, in publicly speaking about my views. And that taught me a lot. I mean, a lot of some things right, some things wrong. And, some counter arguments to my views at the time were very helpful to sort of shape me where I am today. And Substack was not on purpose at all. I mean, I basically, had written a letter to investors where I was in the process of launching a fund in early January, and everything was ready to go. And I was, decided to pause that and launch it in 6 to 12 months. And in the whole process, I had already written a letter that was a very long letter about the mining industry, where I just thought was clever to have a sort of a long sort of documentation about why I thought the mining industry was so at early stages of a secular bull market. And because I can't sit still, I thought it was like, well, I'm just going to publish this on Substack and see what happens. And that whole thing became not what I was expecting. I'll tell you that. And now I can see it becoming a business. But honestly, uh, to me, it just comes natural. Like I spent all day looking at doing research. Like yesterday, the report I put out on Brazilian small cap stocks. Well, I spend most of my day looking at Brazilian equities and small cap stocks.
Right.
Why? Because I'm interested, not because I just want to share a new content. I am actually interested in investing in that. And to me, I think it starts from that. Like is this a good
I think that's a
investment?
common theme. I'm really interested in part of this whole experiment too, which is we've started doing these live streams with top 20 and top 25 or people that I follow because I discovered them and I think they're just brilliant. And then I go like we had Tavi on an episode before I started doing live streams, and it was all because I read her stuff and thought, man, this woman is brilliant. And I was researching, right? So I'm going, well, I just reached out to her like, hey, would you do a podcast? Because I'm like, I want to know you better, right? Because you're smart and you think different, but we have similar things. And so then it became, okay, well, we'll do this and share it with other folks. But again, it's because it's work I'm already doing. And it's like, this is work you're already doing. So you're just leaning into what you're already doing and you're going, if you want some of it, here it is. And you can follow me here or you can subscribe to me there. And And what I've noticed is whether it's Charlie Garcia or you or Claudia or whoever, that's who's doing well on Substack, is the people that are actually doing the work. They're not trying to write for an audience. They're doing the work, and they're finding an audience that wants to know what they're thinking about and what they're seeing. And then if you put a structure around it, which you obviously have, I want to compliment you because you're doing things that other people aren't. You're consistently climbing the chart, but in an organic way. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully this will help get people inspired to take the leap and subscribe to you or upgrade to you if they're already subscribing to you. And again, this is unsolicited, guys. I just met this man literally 35, 40 minutes ago, right? So this is just purely me telling you what I think. I really think that's the magic of what's happening right now on Substack as a moment. I think it will create businesses, like you said, because it'll be organic. But your core business, back to the mining stuff, and I go back to even your early story, you're playing tennis in college. And so do you think there was like this innate, like, were you just fascinated by contrarian thinking? Was that something that you programmatically said, I'm going to look for what no one else is seeing? Or was it something that you stumbled on because you got curious about that first asset and that just led you to go, well, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, how do you think about contrarian? Is it something that you are, or is it something that is just pragmatic use of your own understanding?
Well,
Because
that's
some
a
people
very
try to be contrarian for a reason, and it doesn't always work, right?
yeah. Look, it's a very good question. I think a lot about that, especially when I was in the business of hiring people and so forth, at least looking for analysts that had that skill set. I've asked myself that question a lot. If I can teach people how to be, and I think Peter Thiel said it best. It's not just looking to be a contrarian, but the best ideas are the ones that are contrarian, and you have real justifications to take that contrarian side of the idea. That's really the whole thought. It's not just, okay, let's just take the other side of this. And that's just not how that works in my view. But um, I also think that there's a few other ways to consider. Well, when I started in the industry, I just spent a lot of time reading about biographies of successful people, and the more the common thread of most of their success came from taking a contrarian stake on or contrarian view on a certain sector, a certain idea, and that ended up proving to be right, and they made a killing out of that. And so, you know, or George Soros said a phrase that I thought was interesting as well. It's not how much money, it's not how many things you get right, but how much money you make when you're right, how much money you lose when you're wrong. And I think that's exactly the contrarian way of thinking about all this. Yeah, look, I'm certainly not looking to be, and I don't know where that came from. I think, you meet people along the way in your life that have that sort of, I actually pay very close attention when I talk to people about when I first meet somebody to see if have contrarian thoughts. It's something that I'm always interested in, and I ask a few questions, and you can kind of tell if the person has done independent. It's not just contrarian. It really comes down to independent view.
Yeah. Do you have a thought? Do they have a thinking? What is their bias like? And what shaped that bias? Because again, that's why I always ask, who's the man? What's their worldview? How did it get there? Who's the woman? What's the worldview? How did it get there? Because I'm trying to do that same thing. I'm not trying to agree or disagree. I'm trying to understand, how did you form whatever it is that you do think about? Because if there's new things and parallels, then you could say, okay, well then that makes sense to me. If there's differences, then you can learn something new. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is early versus on time, because I think, unlike you, um, I have been right a lot of times, but I have lost money being too early.
Mm-hmm.
And so an example of that, and just to tie it back to the Substack, like Substack, I think my original post was somewhere back in 2019. And again, it was not a business. I was just rechanging my personal website, and I had a post that was about the end of consumption, like the end of consumerism. And I called it, I think, RIP consumerism. And I want to believe it was like 1913 to 2013 when I first wrote it. When I republished it on Substack, I just changed it to 2019, and it was a macro thesis just based on how the fiat monetary thing was basically going to collapse under its own weight. And I just did this like kind of historical macro thing on how obsolescence and planned obsolescence and all these different things were just coming to a place where they were no longer sustainable, and 70% of our GDP was based on consumption, and that was going to stop. My point is, you don't have to read it or not, it's in the archives, but it was a long, like 12,000, 13,000 word piece that I had published in 2013, republished on Substack in 2019, that still hasn't happened. But there's more signals today that it's right than it's wrong. And yet you couldn't have made money on that when I did it, right? And so I say that as like a falling on my own sword, going, I wasn't trying to be contrarian. I was just reading books like Fourth Turning, and I was reading books like Creature from Jekyll Island, and I was reading and I was synthesizing that. And I went, well, this just is obvious. But I say that because you did that and you struck gold literally and physically. Then you struck silver literally and physically. And so either you're really talented with timing too, or you have a different framework for how you can recognize whether you're early or on time. And I want to know what that is.
I honestly don't think I have I think a lot of the common phrase in that on the topic you're referring to, I think is being early is the same thing as being wrong. And I don't know if I agree with that opinion. Of course, you in situations where something that you had a view on decades ago has not somewhat unfolded. You just maybe either you move on or you do the work and
Or you punch
decide.
out too early. Like I bought gold in 2005, I think March,
Yeah,
because I watched CNBC after I sold a business, and I just got married, and we sold some real estate because I was convinced the market was going to crash in real estate in '04. I
yeah,
was obviously early on that. I was scared to death. I sold all the property. I was like, I need
mm,
to rent. I need to figure this out. And I was like, well, what do I buy? So I sat on a couch for 30 days and I watched CNBC and Bloomberg for like 6 hours a day. And all I heard was talking about was real estate and this and that and stock. And I'm like, no one's talking about gold and silver. I'm going to go buy some gold and silver. And I went to a guy and I bought physical gold and silver from a guy who had snakes and everything in his den. It was like behind this green cat. And I bought as much as I could at $436 an ounce. And
yeah,
then I thought it was a genius when I sold it at 1100, right?
yeah. It-
But I didn't sell it because I didn't want it. I sold it to make a payroll for a business I thought was going to do better, right? So I was arbitraging. But I wish I'd held on to that gold, obviously, for a lot of reasons. My point is that I didn't have a lot of thesis behind that. I literally went on, no one's talking about this, and this is a 5,000-year-old asset class that is underpriced. And it wasn't overthought. I just, after 30 days, was tired of hearing the same thing.
yeah.
So sometimes you could be right if there's a way to do it. People that bought Bitcoin just believed in it. And if they were lucky enough to hold on to it from 250 to 1,000 and all the different pullbacks, then they're rich today because they didn't sell it. So you
Well,
can sometimes be early and still make a ton of money if you don't take profits, but you can also, it's hard to know, right? Hindsight's always easy.
I think that the way to approach it and why the phrase of being early is equal to being wrong, um, is in my view not exactly the best way to look at things. Is because it really depends. I'll give you an example of myself. Right, I when I started first, I mean, naturally, as you look at gold and specifically, and you start getting very bullish on it, which I think my timing was very good at that time, and probably luck. Who knows? Um, and and I got naturally very bullish on silver. And initially, that thesis really played out well, and I thought was the beginning of a bigger move. I sort of underestimated how much the Fed would actually tighten monetary policy in 2021, and silver really got hit at that time. But I had a strong opinion on one thing. I was very firm that that was just a storm into my whole thesis, and that thesis would come back. And here's where I think it's important to people, um, and maybe how you turn the being early equals being wrong on your favor. That was when we bought the fourth largest silver mine in the world. I doubled down into that idea. I looked for even more, sort of out of the box way of thinking about finding exposure to the metal. And to me, that's the way, you keep, y- if the market is ignoring an idea that you continue to have very high conviction on, which happens. I mean, like I turned bullish on energy, not right before the war. No way. I was bullish on energy 12 months before that. And are you going to say I was wrong? I mean, the chart went sideways. I mean, I could have made money on something else, I would have, but no, I chose to be there because I thought things were misallocated, and I wanted to have an allocation into energy. And eventually the war broke out. Not my view, not my view at all. I had no opinion on Iran and the US getting into a war. I thought deglobalization was here to stay and other thoughts, but nothing related to that. And so, it's just the timing is so hard. But the best way you do it is if you're wrong short term about something, and your timing is off, double down on the research. If you're really sure, or not sure, but if you're really convicted on it, you got to act on it again. In my opinion, I don't shy away from those.
I think it's a really well the way I phrase it, and as I'm listening to you, I go, how often am I praying for the pullback, right? Because when you're convicted, you are praying for the pullback because you go, I don't own enough, and or I've sold too much of this because I took profits or because I thought I had a better idea somewhere else and I got distracted. Damn, I hope it pulls back, right? And that's when you're convicted.
I am right now waiting for a pullback in Latin American stocks. Like that to me is I know it's going to get tested eventually, and the whole world is going to come out and say you're wrong. You're very wrong about what you said 6 months ago. Although I was right 6 months ago, and now everyone is going to be saying that, and that's just part of the game. I remember, well, when I start getting too many messages of people, man, you've been so right about these things. I'm usually tell them, I'm like, I'm about to be wrong. I'm just letting you know that's not normal. I don't get things right all the time. It's not just me, but anybody. And so
Right.
you should probably not be listening to me if I just got something very, very right. It's just part of the game, and so you know, uh, I think
Yeah,
approaching markets.
I think that's a profound statement right there. I want to pick up on because you should pay attention to when I was right, but you should listen to me when I was wrong because the thing that will make you right next is what I just learned by being wrong.
Mm.
Right? That's kind of a really profound thing you just said there. I want to unpack, and Anea Capital is in the thread. I want to give people good guys share the thing. We're coming into the bottom 20 here, but appreciate your attention. There's a couple comments in here, and I want to acknowledge them and tie it into a question I've been waiting to ask. So Anea Capital asks you, what's your framework for looking at junior mining companies? I want you to answer that, but I also want you to weave in how you differentiate or what your thoughts are between right ETFs, physical ownership of these assets, and then direct investment or placement into junior or more senior mining ops. Because I'm curious as to where you look at that allocation and either balance it or ignore it. And we all know the reason why ETFs exist because of the complexity and the 99% that you talked about earlier. But I wasn't clear on whether or not you do this through a vehicle like that or whether you do this through direct. And I'm assuming it was direct. But what's your framework for any of it?
No, yeah, as I do invest in selective companies, and that's the fund that I'm eventually going to launch is going to be dedicated on that initially. Um, Look, the I would say that the approach I have into junior mining is, I'm going to say something simple, but it's also, you can make it as complex as you want when it comes to analyzing those three parts. But I believe very strongly that in the junior mining space, the only way to make something work has to fall into three categories. You got to identify a very good asset. When I mean a very good asset is either already a discovery. The beauty of this market is that the market is so mispriced that you can find opportunities that are maybe not 20 million, maybe they're just 40 million, but they already have a discovery hole, which means, or maybe not one, maybe three or four or five. And that just solidifies the view that they're probably onto a discovery. Those things are usually not anomalies, very, very rarely. And so you can take that approach. Either you go very early, $5-10 million market cap, and you're taking higher risk of execution. But then if you're going there, then you're really thinking about how prolific is that ground? Is there a mine nearby? And somebody ever told me it was a very good way to say it. It's not geology, it's closology. It's how close it's from something else. And it's very true. I thought it was very, very clever. But anyways, asset is one, right? I mean, it has to have optionality. All right, you drilled here, you didn't find it. Do you have other targets? How would you twist the story to something else? And that is key. Okay, number two is team. That's subjective. That's much less, quantifiable than anything else. And maybe it is quantifiable when you're dealing with somebody who has done it in the past. And when you're dealing with that, you're dealing with a premium, right? You're paying a premium for that, of course. I mean, the market is not stupid. If somebody who has done it in the past comes in and says that they want to do it again, you're going to pay a premium for it. But that is important. Understanding what the thinking is behind it, their ability to raise money, their ability to market the story. That is all part of the whole junior mining space in a big way. And thirdly, that's probably even more important than the other two, or just as important, is the cap structure. You get into a few companies that basically sold their soul to investors that are not really long-term patient capital deployers. And so as soon as you get any news, any positive news, they're going to be the sellers. And that's where I was telling you about the interpretation of the market sometimes is wrong relative to the type of news you get, because those investors are just looking to, sell something very quickly. And if that's the case, it creates selling pressure because there's no liquidity in those markets. And
I think that's so interesting. Keep going on that, but I think that's so interesting because, especially in the context of what I was sharing with you earlier about my challenge with the space personally, like my own bias, my limited belief around it was it's just too filled with pump and dump BS. But what it really comes down to is a lack of conviction on the cap table. The reason why someone joins into those deals is speculation, and it's not because they actually are convicted on the thesis. They use the thesis as a justifier, but the emotional thing is greed and a short-term return. Because the minute you get real news that matters, it is validating the conviction, they dump out.
And I think that's where I try to come, from an activist investor hat. And I joined the board of a few companies, and where I try to bring my own value into this is how can I help in bringing some quality investors into this? So we changed the cap structure quite drastically. We know we have a good asset. The team can be very good. And, if the team is not good, I can also help in bringing better people to run that, as long as there's openness for that management to.
So your covenants are pretty strong. In other words, what I hear you saying is, whether it's a tender offer or whatever, you're coming in and you're laying down the terms of your capital, superseding or cleaning up whatever is there, if you like everything else.
I by no means I'm not friendly. By the way, I try to avoid those
you're a friendly guy. What I'm saying is, the tactic is you won't go if that third piece isn't something you can maneuver.
Oh yeah,
and you won't go.
If I go is small stake, right? Like there are assets that have incredible, like we've seen in the past. I don't need to, share my own experience, but we've seen plenty of situations in the past where you got the good asset with a good management team, and they drilled, found something, cap structure wasn't ideal, took a little longer, but the company ended up getting bought out at a premium, at a very substantial premium. So I'm not saying that there aren't cases of successes there. There are cases of success of a terrible management team that end up luckily finding something as well. And or situations where the asset never presented itself very well from the very beginning, meaning there were no good samples from surface, there are no good analogs to consider, it wasn't close to anything. And a good management ended up finding it. So, you're really playing with risk here, right? So you're trying to avoid risk. And if you're trying to maximize your gains into the space, you really want to check those three boxes. That's key. And when I check those 3 boxes, I go big, of course. I don't go all in. I just go bigger than what I
Right.
go.
Sure. Got it. So that's the framework is asset with optionality, team, which is important and drives or reduces the premium you'll pay, and then the cap structure, how clean or dirty it is. You might do something that has 2 of those 3, but you're going to do a smaller bit. If you see all 3, you're going to go heavy ish, and you're probably going to pass if it only has 1, unless you really have some dry powder. You just want to throw it at a bet, right?
And Chris, let's just say somebody has a great asset and management and cap structure is not ideal. Can I change that? Is the
Right.
asset worth so much
No, I
that I
can
can
bring in
do
the rep.
something about that? Correct. And that's deal structuring. And I'm really like that. I think there's plenty things to be doing in that side of things. Usually you find, for instance, um,
I get the sense that that's scratching an itch you didn't know you had. Meaning, like, as you've done this, you're now because you just came alive a little bit there, and in the
mhm.
way you breathe and whatever. Like, are you a deal guy?
I love doing deals. I think it's so much fun to identify a good asset. Like for instance, right now, I'll give an example, very, very, clear example of that. Right now we're seeing a lot of M&A across major companies. So major companies are merging with each other. And when that happens, usually you have a lot of non-core assets that become for sale. I love those non-core assets because a lot of times they're great assets, and some of the majors do a good job at dealing with the bureaucracy with those countries that they're dealing with and so forth, because they're major companies, and so I like those assets a lot. When you can bring one asset into one single company and form a common company from there, there's so much value that can be created out there, and so I love doing that. I think that's one of the best ways to create value in the industry as well. But creating new assets is also fun. It's kind of a startup style of investing that a lot of people have dismissed just because it's not a sexy industry, technology or anything like that. And so, but what attracts me is that it's a legacy industry. It's an industry that has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and and we need it. I mean, I don't care where we go 5 to 10 years from now in prices. We need mining. I don't care, you know, where AI will take, we're onshoring, but we're going to need mining regardless. And so I feel very confident that that's going to be established for longer. And if that's the case, I think it makes a very compelling idea, uh, um, to invest in a place that has been neglected for a long time. And some people like to say this to me sometimes, where I'm dealing with a bunch of older guys because all the older guys, there are no new guys in this industry, right? There's no
Right.
interest from younger guys, and so
Which is so interesting to me. I think that's going to change, but it's just
yeah,
it's interesting to me that that's the case. I think that's also an opportunity. Same thing's true in farming, right? I was having a conversation on natural resources with Matter, who's another person you'd enjoy if you're not following him, MAATTR on Substack. Give him a shout out. But we were talking about this, and same thing's true with coconuts or cacao or any of these things, right? It's like it's 55 and 60-year-olds, and the kids don't want to do it, and they want to leave the village, and yet here's this asset that's truly scarce, that's truly needed, and is going to go extinct when there's like this massive arbitrage. You posted this too 12 hours ago about the prices on all these different commodities. I'm curious, how focused or defocused you feel right now looking at this. Are they all plays that you're interested in? Are you very laser focused on 2 or 3 because of the research? What is your thought on, commodities in general and where your appetite is?
yeah, and being so interested in actually how the wealth creation is so massive when you create a good deal like that Saint Cristobal, which is the mine, the silver mine that we put together. It truly is a wealth transformational exercise that was worth every penny and every second that we spend on it. And since then, I went through many others that end up failing or working, and it's just part of the game how that whole thing happens. But what ties up with the commodity question you asked is because I got really interested in energy recently. Of course, it was prior to a war, and the war kind of messed things up. But we formed a company to acquire energy assets, and that's taking shape as well. And I see a lot of value into doing these things. I think there's a few other metals currently that look very attractive in that sense. Nickel is certainly one of them that is just completely off the radar and is absolutely critical.
One of the funniest posts on nickel I saw, you may have seen this one. I don't know if it was floating around on X or where it was. A guy literally, this was 6 months ago, maybe. A guy posted a picture and it was like a storage unit and it had those like 5-gallon paint buckets in it. And he said, I just sold all my Bitcoin and I took all the profits and I bought nickels from the bank because they have a face value of 5 cents and it costs 6.3 cents to make them. Because of the nickel in them. And so he's like, I don't know if it's legal to metal him down or not, but he was basically like, he put this post out and it was no joke. It was hundreds, if not 1,000 5-gallon paint buckets filled with nickels.
Yeah,
and pennies. He had pennies too because of copper. So it was hilarious. But
yeah.
Don't try this at home, ladies and gentlemen, but it was a funny post nonetheless. But what about silver's moment like a couple months back? I've been dying to ask someone like you who's really in it, and not from a conspiracy standpoint, but there was obviously something that broke through the manipulation of price.
Yeah.
What is an expert in this space want to tell us about that? Because I thought it was a fascinating moment, and it obviously was something that the banks couldn't stop or control. But like, talk to me about your perspective on that. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Everything in between.
Well, I've always struggled figuring out exactly what's been happening in that part of the market, just because it's almost impossible to really figure out how much and capital has been deployed to manipulate prices and other things. I've always been also a believer that eventually the intrinsic value of an asset will be met with the supply and demand dynamics of that particular macro asset. And a lot of the people that use the manipulation idea, in my view, are using it as an excuse for the fact that they've been early or wrong, whatever you want to call it, at that time. And I personally, didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out the analytical reasons. We know the reasons behind it, but we don't know exactly the magnitude of that, right? I think certainly we're learning now that it's the reason why it was happening is the same reason why we're seeing what's happening with oil. I definitely think oil is being manipulated here. I know, especially in the U.S. These declines that we're seeing of $20 a barrel in a day, which we saw the other day, and something a little larger than that even. I don't, that's not normal, right? I mean, that's just not normal at all. And we know that there's an external factor causing those changes. And so, I think if you just focus on the intrinsic and the real imbalance of that commodity itself, and you can have a good feeling about where prices could be, call it 5 years from now, then you act on that investment idea. And the longer, or I should say, the longer you believe that thesis will play out for, which to me in mining could be very long. I would say the better it gives you the sort of the realm of possibilities of how to invest, and the possibility of actually going down the pipeline of less liquid ideas, becomes more accessible because you're willing to stay there for a long haul. Like, for instance, I decided to make an investment in Latin America. Now, to me, this is a 10-year play, and I would never buy a real estate here if I didn't have that mentality. Never, because you're locked in here, and it's difficult to sell. This is not a 2-year play. Now, we're talking 10, 15 years from now, we'll revisit this real estate and say, all right, do we want to sell it? Do we want to stay within, or whatever? But I think the commodity space is so interesting and favorable because of what's happening from a macro standpoint in regards to the suppression of interest rates that needs to happen eventually. I don't care
Right.
which Fed president is. Um, and the devaluation of the dollar, which remains at one of its most expensive levels in history still.
Right.
So there's a lot of room for that to occur. So um, it gives you a green light to invest in commodities, but also in countries that have a lot of commodities. And so I think that that side of things is still very mispriced. The Latin America thesis and a few other countries that are outside.
I think the Western Hemisphere, and again, regardless, you see the world as it is, not as you think it should be or whatever, just see it as it is. I think the Western Hemisphere now is in a secular bull market, which includes Latin America in a fundamental way. Like if you look at the thesis and what's happening and energy and the dollar and needing to weaken it and all these trade deals and again, all of the things that are being put in place, regardless of who will get credit for them in the short run or in history, regardless of what people think should happen in the midterms. And the reality is if you take that zoom out view, you could get convicted about everything you just said.
Yeah. And I would say, when the war broke out here in Iran and so forth, it's very normal that, it sort of happened right when I started Substack. And I had a lot of questions about, what do you think about the war? And I just completely shy away from answering those questions. The main reason for it is because I spent not a lot of time thinking about that. I spent a lot of time. There are moments in situations like the war where you could see something very, very significant from a macro standpoint. I'll give you an example. The Russian-Ukraine situation, we did see something that to me was monumental at that time, which was when they seized the Russian U.S. assets and all that, and it caused central banks all over the world to look at that situation and say, well, that could happen to me. So what should I do? I should own neutral assets. Well, that is something you need to pay attention to. Like that's a real macro trend. What is a macro trend here in this Iran situation that I think it's important to pay attention to? Well, the structurally higher resource prices. Pay attention to that, and think about from your portfolio level, how much exposure you have to those commodities. Are the businesses you invested could be hurt by that world of higher diesel price and higher energy prices overall? Think about that too. Fertilizers. And so, I think there's always something that comes out of that. Now, trying to figure out when it's going to end and all these, it's just not a game I'm willing to play because I don't have any edge on that. And so I focus on the foundation of things mostly, and it's just my style. And I know other people do very well with geopolitical analysis, and good for them. I just understand that that's just not my the way I invest. And so,
No, I think it's great. I mean, it shows it makes a lot of sense. It's why all the things that you're writing. It gives us context on why they're written the way they are, where your focus is. You're willing to say what you're not, where you lean on other sources. And man, I mean, you're a younger man than I am, so I'm impressed with your frameworks, with your success. I wish you nothing but continued success. We're going to wind this down, everybody, because it is the top of or the bottom of the second hour. Tavi, Costa, we're going to let you get back to your no doubt busy day of research and meetings and things like that. We want to thank you for your time and energy. I want to thank Claudia for the first hour. Please subscribe, guys. Follow them. Give them some love. Throw some hearts in. Follow up with them direct on any questions. I saw some questions in the chat we weren't able to get to. We could have probably kept talking for another hour. But Tavi, thanks so much, my friend. Thanks for showing up. And let's get you to number one. I'd love to have you have that screenshot. You're climbing as we speak, so that'd be great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the you reaching out, and it's always great to speak with people like yourself. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, and I hope you all the success as well, and all the best. Thank you.
We'll keep bringing it with the atomic level. We appreciate you being here today, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Take care.